1460 WVOX.
Stay tuned for Time to Talk with host Jennifer Graziano of Zion Memorial Chapel and Cox and Graziano Funeral Homes. Jennifer is here to discuss a sensitive subject we all need to talk and think about. Here now is Jennifer Graziano and Time to Talk.
Good morning, Westchester. It's 9 a.m. on Monday, and that means it's time to talk with me, Jen Graziano. I'm a licensed funeral director who oversees my family's funeral homes, Cox and Graziano of both Mamaroneck and Greenwich, and the Zion Memorial Chapel of Westchester. Every Monday, I come to you discussing important topics and sensitive matters that all of us need to pause and reflect upon at some point, and through this show, I hope to provide a platform to do so. We welcome you if you're joining us this morning on 1460 WVOX, and we'll take questions, comments, and calls to 914-636-0110. And good morning, Facebook Live viewers. Happy to have you on with us. And thanks to my friend Tim behind the camera. And hello to the control room as well. Good morning, Tim. Beautiful day, beautiful Monday, beautiful weekend. But you know, the world is a scary place right now, and not a great place. And I think it's a good segue for the guest I have on the line, because it does kind of speak to the old adage that pets are better than people. So today we're going to be, and I know she's laughing because she's heard that before, my guest, Coleen Ellis. She is the founder of Two Hearts Pet Loss Center. And the focus of today's show is going to be talking about the disenfranchised nature of pet loss and grief, as well as the many other facets that come along with losing a pet. And I always say, until you've experienced that, you really cannot wrap your head and your heart around the magnitude of that loss. But Coleen will break it down for us. Good morning, Coleen.
Good morning, Jen. Thank you so much for letting me be with you this morning to start our week.
Yes, happy to have you here. And I do think it's an important topic. The world is divided into two parts, Coleen. You've either have a pet, or you have not. And there's no in between with that. Would you agree?
You know, it's not necessarily half. It's really 70-30, because we've got 70% of our listeners today, or 70% of our population in the United States that has a pet, and 30% don't. So about 70% are going to get what you and I are talking about this morning, and the other 30% are going to go, Jen, you've lost your mind. What are you doing?
Well, that's something that I often I hear that often about myself, so it wouldn't be anything new. So, admittedly, now, Coleen, you're very interesting. So you've been in the death care industry 32 years, so I certainly relate to you on that level. Prior to the past 17 years where you focused on pet loss, in what realm were you initially?
So there's a company that I think you're going to know, Jen, Batesville Casket Company.
Oh, yes, I've heard.
Yep, Batesville Casket actually had a sister called Forethought.
Yes.
And so
okay.
Yep, that's where I started. I started with them. I can't believe I'm going to tell you this. In 1989, I was one of the initial reps for that company.
Wow.
And for our listeners out there, Forethought is a pre-need funding company, meaning that when a family decided to pre-plan and prepay for their final funeral, for their final goodbye, that the money would go into Forethought for protection until the service was actually needed, and then the claim would be filed for Forethought. So I spent my career working with folks in how to talk to people about planning this last event, because let's face it, you know, we're talking about an event that I'm not going to be at. I mean, I'll be there, but I'm not going to be participating in the way that everybody else will be for this final event. But it was very rewarding because, you know, Jen, I know you see it every day and you hear about it. And what I used to tell people all the time was, listen, because we get the comment, you know, just throw me in a pine box and put me at the end for, you know, or a garbage bag for the, you know, the truck to come around, and don't do anything. I don't want you to go to any trouble. But at the end of the day, all of us stand for something in life. And so I would always say to them, stand for something in death and make this final event be something that, you know, was your final legacy, that really summed up your world and gave it one final hurrah. And so it was very rewarding, very rewarding. And then just came the time, and so all that learning and all that work that I did boded very well when I then moved on into founding the first standalone pet funeral home in the country 17 years ago.
Oh, wow. Where was that, Coleen?
It was in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Okay.
In Carmel, actually.
So the first, and that's not something, so, while death is universal and as is mourning and grief, state by state, what you find does vary. For example, the company that you were with, Forethought, that's not something New Yorkers would be familiar with, because in New York, you cannot prearrange a funeral through a third party. It has to be done directly under the license of a funeral director. You have to go right through the funeral home. You cannot use insurance as a vehicle to pre-need as well. The money goes into escrow accounts. So those are some distinctions. In terms of pet loss, you cannot have crematories that handle pet remains and human remains in New York State. You'd be hard-pressed to find pet funerals, standalones in New York State are very rare. I did some research on this about 10 years ago. But when you cross the line into Connecticut, I know there is still one in Stamford, farther up in Connecticut as well. So this is something that, it is surprising that I guess you don't see more of them, because you threw out the statistic before of 70% of Americans are pet owners. And out of those 70%, 100% are bonded to that animal. And, I will disclose to you, so I did not grow up with a pet. My parents had a later in life pet, if you will. And the bond that the whole family felt for that animal, we used to kind of admittedly laugh at people who were dog fanatics, because we didn't get it. We weren't there. And then this animal comes into your home and enters your heart, and it's the most loving, selfless, defenseless, beautiful creature. And the loss of that pet, I will say, if my father was listening, he would agree. I think he would give me disclosure to say this, but he's a third generation funeral director. I'm a fourth, and I have never seen him as broken up as I had when our Oliver passed. He actually wrote an obituary for Oliver, and we put it up on our website. And Tim, who's sitting here, did this beautiful memorial video. But the pain was real. I mean, that was just and having lost so many friends and family in my lifetime, I can't equate it to that and to that feeling. And you're also going to talk on children and pet loss. And I remember so vividly telling my daughter that the dog had passed, and I don't even want to go into that memory, but it was the hardest thing I ever had to sit down and tell her to date. And she was 6 years old at the time, turning 7, so 2 years ago. So there is a disenfranchised aspect to this grief, Coleen, because like I said, until you have been there, you don't get it. Whereas we all as humans can identify with somebody who's going to lose a spouse or a parent, because it's something that, we're all going to go through loss, but we're not all going to go through pet loss. So how do you start with that premise that you're trying to help heal a wound that's not universally recognized?
Well, a couple of ways, and I also want to. I am going to dissect our 70%, because in our United States right now, 83% of the 70%. I'm going to throw some stats out because I think they're kind of fun. 83% of the 70% refer to themselves as mommy and daddy. So we do have a difference between for the pet, exactly. So we do have a difference between a pet owner and a pet parent. And I didn't coin the phrase pet parents. I'm going to give it to PetSmart years ago. But there is this other term that, this term of endearment, if you will, that pet parents want to be called. And it's a whole different grief for them. And so as we prepare for that grief journey, and I do a lot of work in pet hospice too, so I do want to talk about the end-of-life walk, not just the day of, but preparing for that, much like what we do with human beings when we talk about pre-planning and knowing what we're going to do when the day comes, because there's another element, as you well know, with the pets, and that is the fact that we can make the call to help them out of their pain. And so we've got to prepare for that, because that within itself comes with its own emotions and its own guilt that really drives the grief journey. But as as I work with families and I companion families, a couple of things. Number one, I give them permission to feel what they want to feel. I give them permission to be okay to say, I grieved more over this dog than I did my dad when he died. I give people permission to say, feel however you're going to feel. And because at the end of the day, if we could all channel the lessons that we learn from our animals with unconditional love and non-judgmental, if our world could channel all those beautiful lessons, my God, what a better place we would all be in, right?
So true.
So,
go ahead.
It's so true. And so it's the loss of that, again, unconditional love, and the fact that, you know, if I had a dime for every time I heard somebody say, you know, there was only one thing that was there during the divorce and during the cancer treatment and during the nights of loneliness, and it was the dog or the cat or the bunny or whatever. And it's, you know, it's this very peaceful presence that we get with our pets when they're with us, and when they leave. You know, there's some words that I use when we don't have an animal in our house anymore from death, or there's other kinds of grief too, and I do want to talk about that with loss of an animal. And it's this deafening silence, you know, which is, again, so different than what we have with people. It's just deafening silence. It's this presence of an absence, that they're not here anymore, and that they're that little spirit, even if they're a little tiny Yorkie or a little tiny cat, you know, the big hole that they leave, it absolutely rocks people's world. And it is a disenfranchised grief, because if, you know, I always say, if I lined up 10 people and I told 10 people my dad died, all 10 of them would say, I'm sorry. If I lined up 10 people and said my dog died, 3 of them are going to kind of look at me and go, okay, like, go get another one, maybe, you know, and that's all right. I get it. And as I always tell people, when your animal dies, there are going to be a group of people who don't get it because they don't get the human-animal bond, but it's not a time to try to convince them.
That's wonderful advice. But, you know, you touched on something that I want to get to, the replaceability factor. So that's a very common thing. And I've often wondered, because I know with my own parents, they were done after our Oliver. I myself, you know, I never went back to having a pet, and it's a decision that I made long ago, even though my daughter had begged for one. But it's just the lifestyle that I have of working and taking care of her. I didn't, you know, to me, I feel that if you have a dog, you need to be present for the dog and for the pet. But also that bond of love that I did feel for the family dog was so strong. I don't find it to be replaceable. So I'm content in knowing that we had that. It was a moment in time, and it's just not life anymore for us, and that's okay for me. But I've often wondered the quick turnaround. You know, is it putting a Band-Aid on something, or do people actually never fully grieve their pets when they just turn around and get another and get another and get another?
So we do. We live in a replacement society. You know, we live in a society where if the child breaks the toy, let's just go get them another one, so they don't have that emotion of loss, if you will.
Right.
And for some people, they just want the love of an animal, and like I've told so many people, you know, in the very beginning of the loss, you know, maybe it just happened, and they're like, through their tears, I just don't know if I can do this again. I'm like, why on earth would we even be talking about that? And I always kind of jokingly say, let me tell you something, and generally the other part of this too, which we can talk about, that I find most rules of pet loss and pet grief, most of society's rules are written by non-pet lovers, which says you shouldn't cry so hard, it's just a dog, which says tomorrow you should be over it, which says, oh my God, you're going to do a funeral? That's so eccentric. And they're written by non-pet lovers. And so when you say, what do you want to do? How do you want to do this? It takes on a whole different meaning. But the ones who say, just go get another one, are the ones that, you know, maybe don't get that this was a life shared, and this is a loss I need to grieve, and this is a loss I need to get in, you know, reconciled into my being before I go do that. But then again, what I tell pet parents too is going to get another dog is almost like having a second child. You don't have a second child to replace the first child. You have a second child to have another child. And so it's not replacing, it's not dishonoring a memory, it's not doing any of that. It's getting another animal, because that other animal is going to have their own spirit and their own personality, and it, it's not, you don't replace the other one by any means. But again, I always kind of laugh when I do my teaching and my speaking, and I always say, this comment of just get another one. I find it funny because if you think about human loss, and I always jokingly say I stood by my mother at my father's casket, and I'm going to tell you, not one person came up and gave her a little elbow and said, you should just get another one.
Oh my God.
Not one person did that. And everybody always laughs. I'm like, but we do it to animals.
We do. And I have to question that. I mean, again, not judging, but what is the lesson for children on that everything's replaceable and you don't go through the proper mourning channels? I think it actually sets them up to think, okay, you lose something, turn around and do it again. So I think, and I know it's commonly done, and I understand the wisdom in doing it for some people. Again, my family had the alternative reaction to say, we loved him, we were good with that, and we're content with those memories, and it was an irreplaceable bond. But it does kind of beg the question, if we're just such a replaceable repeat society, when do you ever actually stop, process, and feel? But Coleen, let's circle back a little bit where I wanted to begin, but we got so into this great conversation. So Two Hearts Pet Loss Center, you are a resource. I mean, you are a facility where people can come and actually have pet services. You handle pet cremation, I assume, pet burial. Can you tell us a bit more about Two Hearts?
So Two Hearts is actually a virtual center.
A virtual center,
so I do not have a physical. Yeah, it's a virtual center. So I don't have a physical location. So the trajectory of where I'm at right now is that original funeral home that I founded, and I do want to clarify by calling it the first of its kind, because it was merely a funeral home. I didn't have a crematory and I didn't have a cemetery. It was a little 1,200 square foot pet funeral home. I had a chapel, had a visitation room, I had caskets on display, I had urns on display, and memorialization jewelry. It was merely a little funeral home. And what I wanted with that, Jen, is I wanted the experiential component of loss. I wanted to have grief support, and I wanted people to have the opportunity to come in and have a visitation or have a wake or have a service or whatever they wanted to do. I wanted the experience of pet loss. And then I found a trusted partner that helped me with burial and a trusted partner that helped me with cremation. So that particular business, the name of that business was Pet Angel Memorial Center, and it still is in existence, and in fact, there's a few of them around the country now. And I sold that operation about 5 years into it because I did want to take it into a national play. And the folks that I sold it to, it kind of determined we might be headed in different directions as far as our thought process. So I got out and I started Two Hearts as an educational facility or educational center, if you will, again, virtual. And I teach classes, pet loss and grief companioning certification classes. I speak all over the world on the topic and do a lot of speaking within veterinary industries and veterinary conferences, et cetera. And again, very active with pet hospice. At that particular time in 2009, I helped found two associations. One is the Pet Loss Professional Alliance, which is an association of pet cemeteries and pet crematories. And the second association was the International Association for Animal Hospice and Palliative Care. Wow. And both of those are still very, very active. And so I founded them. And then about 6 years ago, I had a gentleman approach me, and he said, hey, listen, I want to start a funeral homes, and pet funeral homes, and I don't know how to do it, but I've got some investors, and you seem to be the, kind of subject matter expert on this. Come do this with me. And after some deliberation, we decided to do it. We, meaning my husband and I, would make the move to Dallas, Texas, where we made our corporate. And when I joined him, I said, I'll give you 3 to 5 years. I'll get you set up and get you going. And then I want to jump out and get real active with Two Hearts again and doing teaching and speaking. And so we started that. That's called the Pet Loss Center. And when I bounced out of there about a year and a half ago, we, at that particular time, were handling about 120,000 families a year.
Wow, 120,000 families a year.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Now
with 11 locations.
So, but back to Two Hearts, and so it's virtual. So this is an online resource for people who have lost a pet. Materials, resources. I want people who are listening and watching to know what they can expect when they find you and this amazing resource that is out there for those who have loved and lost a pet.
So for our pet parents that are listening, what you can expect when you go to my website, you can find downloadable resources on pet loss. You can find them for children. I've got brochures that are out there. If you're running a business and you want to have brochures available for families, I've got a beautiful. Oh, I'm so proud of this one, Jen. I created a beautiful tutorial on how to create a bucket list for your pet.
Oh.
And so you can download the bucket list. I've got a guide to planning ahead, much like maybe what you use with family.
Yes.
I've got a guide to planning ahead, so families can download a guide to planning ahead. And there's also, if you go to my online education, there's some free videos that I put out there. When all of the pandemic started, I got requests from all over the world. Can you record a video on what we can do as a veterinary clinic? Because we're doing drop-off for our families that are needing to put their pets together. We've got to have them dropped off at the curb. And so I created a video on how you can still be connected, how you can still say goodbye, how you can still make death, even in the situation that we are with social distancing right now, you can still make that final event be an experience versus an event. And so I've got that out there. I've got how you do a virtual ceremony for families that have lost a pet and maybe want to have a service. Mm-hmm. And how do they do that? What can they do? So there's tutorials out there for all of that.
So important. So, Coleen, what is this website that we can share right now?
It's two hearts, petloscenter.com.
2 hearts, the number 2. Oh, TWO, the word 2.
TWO.
Okay, 2 hearts, petloscenter.com. And we'll repeat that in a few minutes as we close the show. So, Coleen, I think the overall message of what you're saying is that this is a loss that needs to be both recognized and felt. In some capacity, any life needs to be acknowledged in passing, be that human or animal. I think the other thing that you must face too is I feel that in terms of the accepted animal and the accepted pet bereavement, it seems to start with dog. Would you agree? And then as the animals become less commonly owned, for example, the person with the rabbit probably has a more disenfranchised grief than the person mourning a dog. Mm-hmm. Would you say that's true?
You know what? I think you're probably right on that. And then let's get all the way down to rats and snakes and stuff like that.
I'm good. So full disclosure, I'm just a dog lover. As for the rest of them, I'm good after that. I saw a commercial with a cat the other night, and I was disturbed. So no offense to anybody, but I know where my heart lies when it comes to creatures and animals. But I'm sure that is a real thing, though. I mean, for the people who own those pets, they love them the same way that I loved my Ollie. But it comes down to this outside recognition. But no matter what in life, it all comes down to it's about what you feel towards a person or an animal, and the bond that's felt between, be it two people or person and animal. That bond is always between just two. So you really don't have to explain it to the rest of the world.
Exactly.
And you have to feel it and you have to own it. So you must really make a difference for so many, because at least you give a forum to feel this pain and discuss this grief, and people are looking for that. So materials, especially materials on children and pet loss, those are invaluable, because oftentimes that's the first loss a child is going to experience. I know when we lost our pet, it was sandwiched in between 2 human losses in my family. So the timing could not have been worse for my daughter. It was just loss. It was like three in 3 months. But there has to be a way that you speak to your child about this and make it okay. And the pet is such a constant in their life. So resources to walk children through that are invaluable. And I really do encourage everyone to visit twoheartspetlosscenter.com. Coleen, any final thoughts or insights that you'd like to share with the audience today?
I want to give 2. The first one is, if you are a pet lover and you do call yourself a pet parent and you do have a special love in your life, first of all, honor that love and don't allow yourself to be shamed when that little creature dies. You do what you need to do. You honor the journey. You honor the chapter you shared in the way that's right for you, and permission to do whatever that is and permission to have the feelings that you're going to have. So that's number one. Number two, if maybe you don't get the human-animal bond and you don't have a pet, but you have friends that do, all I want to ask you is I don't need you to understand it. I don't need you to get fully immersed into why they love the dog that much or the cat or the bunny or the whatever. I don't need you to understand that part. What I am going to ask you is respect whoever's going through it.
Yes, absolutely.
And just make space. Just make space to listen and to ask and to say, tell me about the dog again. I never really got to learn that much about him. And when you ask the question, I want you to really listen. I don't want you to talk him out of it. I don't want you to do anything. Just listen.
Just listen and be there. Wonderful advice. Coleen Ellis, the founder of Two Hearts Pet Loss Center. That's 2 TWO Hearts Pet Loss Center.